Good morning. Thank you all for joining us. We will at this point call the special board meeting to order. Mr. Davis, roll call, please.
Mrs. Eicholtz?
Here.
Mr. Marks?
Here.
Oh.
Mrs. Singh? She will be via Zoom. Mr. Summerall?
Here.
Mrs. Tullis? Or Mr. Tullis, sorry, I'm trying to pay attention to what's... Mr. Tullis?
Here.
Thank you.
There's a joke in there somewhere. Is there a motion to adopt the special meeting agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
At this point, I'd like to ask everyone to stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Thank you all again for joining us today. Mr. Konecki, you want to start off with the superintendent's report?
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We've got a couple of personnel actions today under 5A. Number one, the approval of administrative contracts, new middle school principal, which I'll make some remarks about in a few moments. Approval of some certified staff contracts, classified employment contract recommendations for this year for aides, classified salary adjustments, and approval of supplemental personnel service contracts for transition time. And I would ask the board to, if there are no questions, to entertain 5A 1 through 5 at this time.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Eicholtz?
Aye.
Mr. Summerall?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Yes.
Mr. Tullis?
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. If it's okay, Mr. Tullis, I'd like to make a few comments about our new middle school principal. Miss Lauren Gentine is here with us today. Hi, Lauren. Could you stand up and come on up to the podium, please? Welcome. Lauren brings an exceptional amount of experience in the Indian Hill School District as a seasoned instructional leader and head principal the past 4 years at Mason Middle School. She's managed a staff transition during a facility construction project also while at Mason. I have a lot of confidence that Lauren, moving through a very thorough and rigorous selection process over the last 5.5 weeks of her life with such poise and grace. We're very proud to have her here. Prior to her tenure as an administrator at Mason Schools, Lauren served students as a teacher for 5 years, including a year here at Indian Hill High School in 2014, where she taught language arts for a year before she returned to Mason as an administrator. Lauren earned her Bachelor's of Arts from Ohio Wesleyan University, her Master of Arts from Xavier University, and she's currently in the doctoral program at Miami University. We are so excited to have Lauren here to join the Indian Hill family, and congratulations, Lauren. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. If you'll indulge me in a quick story, just before the 2014-15 school year, I was shopping at Target. I was teaching in Mason, had a great schedule, a great thing going, loved it there. I ran into the Indian Hill High School principal, and he said, "Hey, I have an English opening." "Well, I'm not looking to leave." And he said, "Oh, just come meet us, meet the team." I fell in love with it here, so I joined the high school staff as an English teacher and loved it, loved every second of it, but decided I was ready to jump into administration, and actually at his encouragement, he did a lot to teach me that year. So Mason hired me back as an assistant principal. I've spent the last 7 years there. Well, right at the end of the school year, one of my students from Indian Hill, and I only had a few, I was only here that 1 year, reached out to me and mentioned what an impact I'd had on her life. And I thought, gosh, I kind of forget about my year there. It was easy to forget. It was so great. I would have never left if it weren't for this move into administration. Then, a couple weeks later, I make a random phone call to an Indian Hill administrator about an unrelated situation, and she says, "Oh, I thought you were calling about my job. They just posted it today." I said, "You're kidding. I'm not looking to leave, but let's talk about this." So the way that this has laid out for me is similar in that I try to keep my head down, do a good job, serve the people where I'm at, but when Indian Hill comes calling, it's hard to turn away from that. I'm thrilled and humbled. I'm not naive, though, and I talked a lot about this in this process over the last several weeks. I'm not naive to the work and the challenge that is ahead of us, particularly as we go through facilities project. At the same time, what I've learned in doing that is when we're intentional about looking for the opportunities in those challenges, looking for the ways in which we can more intentionally come together as a staff, because it's not convenient. It's hard when we can look for opportunities to connect with each other, to connect with the kids, to prepare our instruction and prepare our classrooms for the beautiful facility that will open. We learn so much more than if we just were keeping our head down and going through it. So I'm humbled and I'm honored, and I really can't believe I'm here because it's so exciting. It's the opportunity of a lifetime, and I won't let you down. Thanks.
Thank you, Lauren. Welcome again. Julie, I know that you're in the back there. Did you want to say anything?
First, I want to apologize for my entrance. Lauren, yes, as the IHEVSD president, I want to say congratulations for making it through a rapid and intensive interview process. But think how much easier the work will get when you're joined by a dedicated and truly an innovative group of teachers. I also want to say thank you for seeking out the opportunity and bringing to us your creativity and passion for middle school learners. We're just eager to work with you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Board members?
Just, as I asked you earlier, just make sure to, full disclosure, we don't really have a middle school at this point. So, just want to make sure it's clear that we will, but welcome to the team. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
Congratulations,
Thanks
Lauren.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all for my report. Transition into the
Yeah,
work session.
onto the work session. We'll start with the presentation of the construction team. Holly, you want to lead us off?
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Holly McLean with MCS and Associates, as owner's rep here. We've got our full project team with us with MSA and Skanska. Just working through some of our project status update. Today, we're coming before you. We've got some GMP amendments to the contract to finalize with the primary school, elementary school, and middle school, and getting things moved forward with that. Also looking for consideration today on 2 items with direct purchase for materials and installation of kitchen equipment. And as we look through here, we can start by doing a project status update on each of these. Primary school is well underway. You can go back one, thank you. Primary school is well underway this summer with some of the renovations at this point. With that, the only other items we needed to purchase to make it fully contracted at this point were the building control system, and then also an allowance for some irrigation system outside of that. As we look at that, no, you're good. We just wanted to see Nikki too. Yeah. Okay. As we look at this current construction total cost of everything at this point is $11.3 million. That is approximately 8% over from our 2019 and 20 budget to what current costs in the market are today. As we go to elementary school, also elementary work has started over there. Looking at this current total cost for this with the remaining packages of finishes and interior right now is 17.7 overall. The GMP today that finalizes this portion out is about $7.8 million. So, looking at the middle school, which as you walked in and as you're noticing your new building over there, still coming out of the ground on that one. Foundations should wrap up by the end of the month here and starting to go vertical. So we will definitely see some enclosures and things like that in the next couple months for that. With this, about, I would say 50% has been contracted through site work, construction, foundations. some of the more structural pieces. For this GMP that we're looking at right now, this is more of the finishes, the interior portions of this, and total current overall cost of about close to 55.8 million overall for this project. So we move, there's 2 other projects within this, and we haven't forgot about them. We just haven't started on them yet, construction-wise. But we've definitely started to look at, and MSA is finalizing design about September of this year for some of the high school renovation portion, as we're tying into the building and making sure that all things are operational. The only thing we've contracted so far, because of how far the procurement dates are out, is electrical switchgear to kind of tie that into the building. So we have tried to pre-purchase some of the larger pieces of equipment early on to make sure that they're here in time for what we need to turn over. And then looking at the transportation building, also on a September timeline basis of getting final design for that, and looking to contract by the end of the year on that as well. So we did purchase a generator for that. It is in the mix of getting here at some point. So we have been tracking all these pre-purchased larger pieces of equipment so that we can bring those into the fold. And then looking at our total overall, we originally started with our master plan budget of 77 million from the bond issue. Added scope included some of the items where we started to get into this renovation and understood the scope and depth of where some of these systems were at. The board looked to approve about 1.9 million of that for our total budget. And right now our total cost overall with all 5 projects is about 91.8 million. I think there's one more slide. Oh, this is just some of the comparables from the last year. I know we're, from when the bond issue was passed to now, market conditions have changed and procurement times have changed overall. Just wanted to give you guys another snapshot of where our market trends have been going, and where Indian Hill has kind of fell within that line. And then I believe there's one more slide for us. So next steps, finalizing the GMPs and finalizing the contracted amounts for the remainder of the work at middle school, elementary school, and primary is what we're looking at considering today. And then also the kitchen equipment that I didn't put on there, but is definitely a part of those projects. And then looking at finalizing some of the contractual work for high school and transportation at the end of the year. Are there any questions?
I don't have any questions at this time. I guess just for anybody out watching or looking at the cost increase, just know there's been a lot of time and effort spent by us, by our construction team, by our owner's rep, by everybody really to go in and look at every possible way to achieve savings. It's no secret this is an incredibly difficult market right now, both from a labor perspective and a cost perspective. And our charge is to find ways to save dollars without sacrificing quality. And we're confident that we're going to get there. It's no question it's a challenge, but everybody's been putting a ton of time and effort into making this, dealing with this as best we can in a difficult situation. So thank you, Holly, your team, and all who've helped.
Holly, the kitchen equipment, that's all included in the normal numbers, right? That's not addition.
No, this is, that was in the budget beforehand. We've kept to that, I think, over $1 million worth, and we're about $10,000 off overall for the kitchen equipment. So doing that direct purchase is, we've worked with the teams to understand what equipment where, worked with your staff, and the team's done a great job trying to get that bid out properly, and we've got the contracts that we'd like for you to consider today.
Thank you.
I just want to echo what Bear said, that appreciate the work that MCS and scans, getting everyone's done. I know that there was a lot of questions around costs and multiple meetings of going through and trying to rework things and seeing how we could trim something here and trim something there without, affecting the project scope, and appreciate the work that everyone's, put in. So thank you.
We definitely want you to have the program and the quality that you want at the end of the day, and to make sure that, when you, I know I'm pointing at you, but I was like, when you're gonna move into this building, so.
Thank you.
So board members, up for consideration are the 3 GMPs that we'd like to discuss here today for the timeline, middle school, elementary, and primary school, and you've had those resources, and if there are no further questions, we need to consider those today.
I do have one more question. So on the GMPs, I just want to make sure that there's nothing that can happen for us to exceed these numbers. They are an absolute ceiling that we will not exceed under any circumstance. Is that the way I understand that?
We've taken every precaution to try to mitigate any potential risk moving forward. I can't stand here and tell you absolutely not. There's no other way, because I think we've probably been proven wrong a couple times in the last probably 18 months of how the market trends were going to go and where they're going to stay and when they're going to plateau in certain regions. But we've put as much language into those contracts and amendments as we can to help mitigate that risk and look at all the possibilities that we can see.
There are certain things that are, like, we have allowances for certain items, and those could, if the materials for those allowances end up being more, we do have some continued risk. I think the more we can track today and the further we get into the project, the more that risk goes down.
Yeah.
But to be clear, that risk continues.
And we still have in those numbers all the contingencies from before of the owner's contingencies that you've seen. We're keeping allowances in for certain items that may shift during time. So we're trying to give you the full numbers with those contingencies and allowances. I think I'll reiterate what I'd said before. We're starting to get out of the ground now. Soil is your biggest risk to start out with. Enclosure's the next one. And that's what we've been working on and what's included in there now with that. But once we start to take away some of these factors, that risk starts to melt away.
We still have a little bit north between the CMR and the owners, a little bit over 5 million combined between the two.
Correct.
Is that right? So we've got, some room for coverage.
So there's approximately 3.2 out of the owner's contingency at this point, and then there's about 1.2 from CMR standpoint overall.
So if we had a subcontractor that changed their mind and did not want to do this, we'd have to go out and find someone else. And then we'd have to start from scratch, whatever that number will be. So that would be outside of this GMP, is that
That
correct?
would be our risk within the GMP.
Yes.
What other big risk would you foresee?
I would say the remaining work to bid out.
And how can we do that in a quick and efficient way to get more of this locked in sooner than later?
Well, I was like, I think it's just at this point, finalizing, there's only a small portion, and I can share it with you. I kind of did a Gantt chart of a visual of this is how much you've contracted to date. This is how much we're asking to contract today. And then the small portion at the end are some of these allowances that we've built into that number that require further design, but it's compared to what we're trying to contract today, is a very small portion of that.
Okay.
So we're probably looking at approximately 34 million total of contractual items today. That includes probably $3 million of allowances at this point.
And is there a reason why we can't do more of that sooner than later?
Well, we're trying to do it sooner, but it's finalizing design and making sure that we're getting all the visuals that your staff and administration need to make those final decisions. we're used to seeing things in 2D form and on paper and working with that. But I was like, until we get some shop drawings and actual samples for you from the contractors and getting that piece finalized, we want to make sure that you're getting the product that you envision
Sure.
moving forward.
Sure, I just want to make sure we're doing what we need to on our side to keep the process
Yeah.
moving, and I want to be several steps ahead of this because of what we're dealing with in this environment. And the more we can get it locked down sooner versus 3 months or 5 months from now, I think it's in our best interest.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'd like to make anything else? I'd like to make a motion to approve the GMPs that are in front of us today, and the kitchen purchase, kitchen equipment purchase.
So move. Second.
Mr. Marks?
Yes.
Mr. Summerall?
Yes.
Mrs. Eichholz?
Yes.
Mr. Tullis?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Holly.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Holly.
guys.
Thank you to all of our project team members who are here, and we know that's been a lot of hard work over the last 2 months to get to this point, and we'll look for another report here soon. Thank you.
Finance team up next.
Yes, board members, we have Andy Brossard here with Bradley Payne, and Kent Cashel and Andrew Lasky are here from RBC Capital Markets, and they are going to share with us some information on supplemental borrowing options today.
Thank you. It's good to be here in Indian Hill again. And as Kirk said, I do represent our whole financing team. Andy Brossart in the back and Andrew Lasky works with me at RBC. So we put together just a very brief slides for you to take a look at. You may have already looked at. I think our part of this is best served as a resource for you guys in question and answer or discussion, but I'll walk through these quickly. A little bit about market conditions. The AAA MMD curve is, MMD is the index that measures the tax-exempt market, which we borrow in, obviously. We are correlated with treasuries, but not directly correlated. So we have an index that tracks this, and this just shows the top left is, the graph on the left is like a longer-term historical perspective of the rate, 10-year, 20-year, and 30-year over a time period from '09 till now. That does give you a perspective that, although we know that rates have risen, you can see that in the historical perspective, we're still on the lower end of middle, I would characterize it. The graph on the right zeroes in on July 21 till now, and that's the rise in rates that we're all well aware of. Most people are well aware of it on the Treasury side, follow the Treasury and the Fed, but it has affected our market as well. If you go down just a little bit, you'll see some maximum, minimum, and averages over those two time periods. So it gives you an idea of where we are today on the left there at the current. One thing that is kind of conclusatory from the current market is that there's not a huge penalty for going long, right? You hear people talk about an inverted yield curve. Simply means that short-term rates are actually above long-term rates. And while we don't have an inverted yield curve in the tax-exempt market, we certainly don't have a big difference between short-term rates and long-term rates. And if you go to the next slide, I think it shows that pretty well. Two things from this slide. One, the blue line is the historic average of these rates, and the red line represents where we are today. And I point that out because virtually every client that I work with that went on the bond issue in the last 2 years is dealing with this situation. So it's obviously not unique, but this at least puts it in perspective, because some people I think believe, oh geez, we're getting hit with this inflationary problem and right at the time when rates are high. They're not high, they've risen, but historically they are still below the historic average. the bottom line, and there's a top line you can hardly see there, but there's a big range of what it's been over a long period of time. But we are below the historic average over like a 30-year period. And then lastly, another indicative chart of the percentage of the time that rates have been lower since 1991, again, 30 years. On the short-term end, they've been lower almost 50% of the time, but on the long-term end, it's less than 25%. Another way of saying that rates are still low. So all that's just to set this up to say that if part of our solution here is borrowing additional dollars to support the project, then it is not quote-unquote bad time to borrow. So lastly, we'll talk about this, and I think getting to Q&A here is best. How you do this is not hard in terms of borrowing additional dollars to support your project. Again, we have districts all over the state that are looking to do this, and we know the best ways to do it to get the lowest possible rate. But really the question that we often deal with here is a public policy question, I guess I would say it. When you look, there's a reason why you passed a bond issue for 30 years. And the reason you do that is because it's going to be used over 30 years at very least. It's a public asset. It's different than our private financial lives. And so there's going to be people who use it over that 30-year period. And it's going to be different people using it. And so you could have gone on the ballot and said, let's pay a bond issue off in 10 years. And what that would have meant is exorbitantly high taxes on your current residents so that somebody who moves in year 11 pays nothing, right? And so that's why we don't do that. That's why in public policy, we borrow over a long period of time. And as a person who probably doesn't have 30 years, I really appreciate it when my public officials do that. And that's how people don't tend to think about it that way, but that's how we really do need to think about public policy and public finance. And so you have options for borrowing. I won't get into the how unless you really want to, because we've got that covered. The question comes down to what's our annual payment? When you pass a voted bond issue, you get the authority from your voters to not only issue the debt, but to levy a tax to make the payment. And that tax is levied every year at whatever rate is necessary by the county auditor. It's outside of the political process. And so you have the revenue to make the payment. It's the way we handle large projects in Ohio. When you do a supplemental borrowing like this, unless you went back on the ballot for some additional revenue, you're really looking at this from the perspective of what can I handle within my own budget, current resources. So that's what, again, lots of school districts are doing right now. When you look at it from that perspective, what most of the clients I work with are asking is it appropriate to borrow long, and how long can I borrow? That may not be the question we're answering here, but I want you to understand what others are doing in the state. The reason being is they want to make the impact on their current resources as small as possible. So it's just like you can imagine, you certainly pay more interest by borrowing longer, but your annual payment is lower. And to put that in perspective, if you look at that chart, for about the same annual payment over 10 years, you can borrow $5 million over 10 years. For the same annual payment, you could borrow $10 million over 30. And so these are all obviously estimates that change every day based on current market conditions. So just consider these a ballpark. But the important column is that column second in from the left, the average annual payment. And that's what you need to struggle with and come to grips with when you're looking at a supplemental borrowing. And what can we handle out of our current resources? That's how it works. How we borrow this money, if you want to talk about it, we can, but we have ways to do it depending on the length of the borrowing that you decide on. We can help determine the method of sale, if you will, the method of borrowing it. So I guess I'd stop and open it up because I think this is a better conversation for better for Q&A.
I guess a couple of things. Thanks for the presentation and the stuff we've gotten over time. All three of these options, in terms of the prepayment penalty falling off after 8 years, it's noted at the bottom. Is that on the 20-year and the 30-year?
Sure.
Is that on both of those?
Yeah.
Okay.
And in fact, it could be on shorter depending on If we are wanting to borrow over a shorter period of time, we may be able to do a direct lending with a financial institution. If we go over a longer period of time, we probably would use the capital markets, which is what we use for the bond issue. Since we just did an issue in the capital markets, going the capital markets route is very easy. We just talked to the rating agencies. We just did an offering document. We've done all that. But we can build in the prepayment option either way.
Great. I think, not a question, but I think two things that I think are important for the public to know. I think one is, through the work that Bradley Payne, RBC, and Mr. Davis did, the $77 million that we borrowed, we did get a substantial premium on that. And so our debt's down that we owe to the public, somewhere in the neighborhood, Mr. Davis, of what?
71.4 million is what we did that final bond offering for.
So I think it's important to know that team, right, of Bradley Payne, Mr. Davis, obviously others, and RBC was able to substantially reduce that obligation that we have, from the community. And I think the second thing that Mr. Davis brought up, just in conversation, was, that we do have the ability, we're trying to keep as much cash as possible so we move forward, but we do have the ability, and it's limited in terms of what we can do, but to invest our cash to create some type of spread between what we would borrow and what type of earnings we have. So I think that's important to know, that whatever, assuming we do move forward at a future date, that these rates that we're paying, there is going to be an offset because we have the ability to invest that. And so I appreciate Mr. Davis's wisdom in thinking through all that stuff. So that's all I have.
For the first time in a long time, that condition is existing, yes.
But not Mr. Davis's wisdom. That's been around for a while.
No. Didn't mean that. The ability to actually earn some money.
That's definitely debatable.
So you made a comment that I think is important. You're seeing this elsewhere. It's not just
Absolutely,
here.
yeah. Sure. Think about the process we have to go through with schools, and I know all the construction folks. I've been doing this 20 years. Prior to that, I was a COO of Cincinnati Public. I was commiserating with Jim. I said I'm a recovering business manager. You see, I have never seen in my time period an inflation figure that high, right? And we worked with the commission back 25 years ago, and you're not, but the point is I follow that. So yes, we end up having to vote to go on the ballot months before the election. Our bonds aren't even issued till months after the election. There's some risk in that we deal with every day. We end up going on with the best information we have, but we're well in advance. We don't have the luxury that some other forms of government do to getting all the way maybe to this point before we even, are raising our money. So anyone who's been on the ballot in the last 2 years is in this position to some degree. We actually, Andrew and I co-authored an article for the School Business Officials magazine, about this because it's happening everywhere. And obviously, it's a simple thing. At the end of the day, you have a discussion about value engineering, which you've done. You may look at cash on hand, which you may or have done. And then you end up determining whether you need this supplemental borrowing. And if you do that article, by the way, if you want to look at it, goes into a little more detail about the how. But essentially, the how, what I want you to know is that this is commonplace, that this particular situation where we need a supplemental loan to a voted bond issue is kind of a sign of the times. But school districts borrowing relatively small amounts and not wishing to go on the ballot for that small amount is very commonplace. So we do it all the time.
So basically, to recap what you're saying, it's not a case of someone being negligible and not paying attention to the costs, but it's due to the economic situation and inflation that we've been seeing that we're having to do this.
Well, absolutely. I mean, when you're seeing it in every single project, pretty much that's obviously the case. It's an environmental issue, the broad construction environment. When you start with fuel costs, that impacts everything because everything has to be brought.
Thank you. Nancy, anything? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
It's good seeing you.
Next up, we have a solar PPA presentation from Monica Niehaus from Malink. Thank you for joining us, Monica.
Good morning, everyone. Monica Niehaus and Seth Parker here with Malink Solar. So we're going to quickly review an opportunity for on-site solar. Two main points I want you to take away before we go into this is we've been talking about inflation and, all these project costs that are way above than what you predicted. We've took the conservative approach to assume a certain, electricity cost escalation rate over the next 30 years. Know that, we didn't account for the recent spikes that we've seen recently. However, within our project costs, so it's about a $2.5 million project, that does account for, latest inflation. However, the second point is that this is a power purchase agreement or a PPA is a way to finance this at no upfront cost. And also, as you look at the next 30 years, it's a way for you to hedge against these future rising electricity prices.
So if I could just frame this for anybody in the public that's paying attention, one of the 4 pillars of our master facilities project was to maximize the environmental impact on our new build. It was something that our facilities committee wanted us to look at moving forward, and so we've been exploring and researching these environmental impact options as we look at the build overall over time, and that's one of the reasons why we're having this presentation today, to make sure that we're thinking long-term about the environmental impact with this build.
So a power purchase agreement, again, what I mentioned is that there's no upfront cost. The way to think about it is essentially you're going to be paying Duke Energy for a certain portion of your energy needs. And then there's going to be a third-party system owner, who's investing in the system and monetizing the tax benefits since the school can't do so. And you'll be paying per kilowatt hour to the third-party owner. So that's where the monthly payments come into place. Again, Duke Energy and then the PPA owner. The term that we propose is it's a 25-year PPA. And we've built in a 1.5% escalation rate, but that is fixed. So you know what you're going to be paying per kilowatt hour for the next 30 years. The reason why this is urgent this year is because the current federal investment tax credit is 26%, and that's going to be dropping down next year. The PPA owner would monetize those benefits and then sell, a smaller kilowatt hour rate back to you guys, since they have those higher tax benefits. So you still get the long-term benefits of it. It's creating a fixed energy scenario for the long run. And additionally, there's no O&M responsibility on the school. So that is entirely in the hands of the PPA owner. They are solely responsible for making sure that the system is operating and producing as much energy as we say it's going to. So again, as I mentioned, the cost implications of waiting. 26% this year takes 26% off the total investment cost of $2.5 million that the system owner, would pay for. Next year drops down by 4%, with it eventually stepping away. So, next year that PPA rate would be higher. If you want me to go to the next slide. What I mentioned in the very beginning is that our savings does not account for the recent utility spikes that we've seen recently. And we've listed a few Ohio utilities here, Duke Energy being, the one that services Indian Hill. And, what we've seen over the last 50 to 60 years for average prices of commercial electricity is a 3% increase. But you can see here that this is unprecedented, and it's gone way beyond that. So really, you should be able to see the savings earlier, even though you're initially paying a higher per kilowatt hour rate with the PPA. So again, it's a way to hedge against that. And then, as Kirk mentioned, this is a way for, Indian Hill to really distinguish itself and as more Ohio schools, are implementing solar on their campuses and then also using it as a way to enhance their curriculum. This is a way for Indian Hill to, to accelerate and have this for the next, several generations of students. So we've got our high-level roof layout. This is it's a ballasted roof mount, no roof penetrations. Again, with, half of the school being still under construction, this is, these are the latest drawings that we, that we have from MOTS. And so we've come up with the system size of about 1.7 megawatts throughout the campus, which would supply about 50% of the total annual energy needs.
Are those panels visible from your standing in the parking lot? Are those panels visible?
No,
If you're driving by Drake Road, are they visible?
no.
Are they shielded with a parapet wall, or are they just not? How do you block them from being visible?
So the ballasted roof mounts will have just a 10-degree tilt. So it's essentially the same as you can't really see the, like the color of the roof, for an example, from the road. This is a commercially, wide used solution to flat and low sloped roofs that again don't require any roof penetrations.
You mentioned that list, right? Is there, on that list, is there any schools here locally that this is on that we could go see?
Bethany schools.
Yeah, Bethany is one of the schools that we visited last summer to check this out. And of course, Chris and MSA, they've helped to consider some of this design with our new builds.
I saw Princeton on that list. Are they ballasted roof mounts at Princeton?
Yeah, so there's a smaller ground mount project that was recently installed, Lincoln Heights, as part of Princeton's within the district. It's a ground mount, so it is visible. So just to summarize, the estimated annual usage versus the solar production, it would supply about 50% of the total campus energy needs at no upfront cost to you. The starting blended PPA rate would be about 8.9 cents per kilowatt hour between the three schools. And then the per kilowatt hour savings is actually closer to 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So while, yes, you're starting out at, paying a slight premium to what your current electricity rates are, eventually as we continue to see electricity prices go up, you're going to then be locked into this price, with the remaining of your energy needs still supplied by Duke Energy.
So is that the only downside or risk that we're looking at, is an increased short-term cost? Is there anything else that we'd be looking at in terms of risks potentially?
No, I mean, a PPA is a low risk financing option that I would say about half of our customers typically use, even if they have the cash available, because again, there's no O&M responsibility. It's still a way to hedge against future electricity prices from rising. And they also achieve their environmental goals as well.
And then how did you settle on the 50% versus 60 or 70?
For energy offset,
Yes.
so we try to maximize the amount of roof space given the current roof drawings that we have. So if we're to expand to, for an example, parking canopies, that would help offset more.
And this doesn't impact our installation costs, labor, that aspect of it. This is just materials, or is it both?
So the price of the PPA, that rate that you would be paying, is a function of the full turnkey engineering, procurement, and construction of the system.
And I believe that we've already approved adding the additional structural support to the roof to allow for this?
For the middle school,
Okay, so do we have to then,
elementary.
so at the primary school, do we have to have any additional out-of-pocket costs to get the building ready for these systems? Or is that something?
So that's something that MOTS is looking into as well. So we would, have, as a part of this cost, we have the structural engineering.
But is that our risk or is that your risk?
I mean, that's our risk, but again, these are budgetary costs based off of what we've seen in the marketplace as of recent. So, until we get to that final stage, then, we would have to finalize more of the engineering and get the contracts together to, really firm up the price.
Do we have a timeline on that?
Yes, so how the tax benefits work in order for the PPA owner to monetize that this year and thus lock in this rate, we would have to get moving with contracts pretty soon because you have to incur at least the project owner has to incur at least 5% of the total project costs within this calendar year. And in addition to that, there needs to be, so as a part of that 5%, equipment needs to take delivery within 3.5 months. We're located here locally in Milford, and if needed, we can, house materials in our warehouse. But as far as locking in this lower rate, things would have to move pretty quickly and finalized and move forward, I'd say, in the next month.
Does the installation of the panels, this is probably more for Pete, would that delay you in completing the middle school or the elementary school renovations? Or does that all just happen once you're done, then they come in?
Once we're done.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that won't impact the overall delivery of the middle school timeline?
Yeah, so this would all happen once everything's completed and again, assuming that we could move forward with the entire scope of work that we've listed, which again would be on the existing Indian Hill High School roof, and then the new roofs that are being built.
I guess two questions, and then a piece of information would be helpful for us for the future. The O&M, the owning and management of that, is that a 25-year term on the presentation that we have?
Yes.
It is. And then one thing, I believe that, I know the village uses a third-party vendor to negotiate the electrical usage for the village. I know that we're part of that. I believe that we're not at the 544. I believe currently that we're at like a 498. And that's for another year. So it would be helpful maybe to rework the documents showing us that starting point versus the 544. So when we look at that cash flow projection, we've got a different starting place. And the other thing that would be, I think, helpful would be looking at historically, and obviously we're in unhistoric times, but looking back and looking at what is the rates that the village has negotiated, because I think we're in a little bit different place in the sense that we're able to negotiate pretty substantial savings on our kilowatt per hours because we're included in that aggregate negotiation that the village does. So that would be helpful, but I do think, obviously being forward thinking, having solar is all part of, what the district believes in. But those would be, from my perspective, two pieces of information that'd be helpful as we look at making a decision in the coming months.
And who would be the best person who has that historical data?
If you can probably talk to the city manager. She has that, I would think.
Dina, okay.
Dina would probably be able to get that to you, but I believe that, like I said, I don't think we're at the 5.5 cents. I think we're at like 4.9.
You're just talking about supplier costs.
That's correct, the supplier costs, like when we got the cash flow analysis, where you showed sort of, where the cash flow break even is, using that 3%. It would be nice to be able to look back historically at what the village has paid, compare that to the market, so we have a better sense
Sure.
of, how that looks.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think the delta that you're mentioning there is, you talk about your energy supplier charge, and there's distribution and transportation charges on top of that, that are on a kilowatt hour basis that are in that analysis. But some of them will vary.
And back from a timing perspective, if we were to do this, we would need to do August meeting, approve it at the August meeting.
I think that's what I'm hearing, end of August, early September at the very latest, to move contracts forward.
And for our construction management, is that doable with everything else we have going on time-wise?
August time for us, because it's happening, you know, after we're pretty much done. I would think infrastructure, you know, you could take that out farther, because
Yeah.
middle school, you know, we have a lot of work to do before we got to start worrying about getting the electric up through the roof and stuff, so I think we have time. So their timeline for August, it just really doesn't impact us on our.
Any other questions? Anything else you want to point out on the slide deck, Monica?
No, I think that pretty much covers it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kirk, anything else on your list?
No, just want to thank everybody who presented today. And again, for those who pay attention with the public meetings here, these are all educational presentations on the financing piece of the borrowing side for the construction project. That is totally separate from looking at this PPA agreement with regards to an environmental solar project. And just want to make sure if anybody has questions, they can feel free to ask me or make them. We'll try to explain where we're at along the process, because there's a lot of moving parts here with this construction project. It's a multi-site project, obviously. 3 important GMPs improved today, but we still have more design to do on other parts of this multi-site project, and we still have design to do on the environmentals. So thank you all for presenting.
That's it. I echo everybody's thanks. This is a team project for sure. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Congrats, Lauren. Welcome to the team. I'll talk to you in a little bit.